Plans for the wall have been approved.
Cuban commandant died. The UK has left the European Union.
Which has caused a
Big crisis in Spain.
have also aligned themselves with people to test ballistic missiles.
A lot of political games make you the rebel, the one fighting back against the system. Tropico 6 makes you the system, and it turns out that's a much more interesting place to learn from. Okay, before the real run, I wanted to show the tools in isolation, no pressure, no losing condition, just the systems on display. We're going to focus on two of them, propaganda and elections, because those two together are basically the whole game, and also honestly, a pretty solid summary of how soft authoritarianism works in the real world. Alright, quick thing. Before we get into the propaganda mechanics, these are your factions. Every citizen on the island belongs to at least one of them. They all want different things, and none of them fully agree. Your job as El Presidente isn't to make everyone happy. That's impossible. Your job is to keep enough of the right people satisfied that nobody revolts. This is a propaganda building. The game calls it a media building, such as newspaper, TV station, or radio station, but let's be honest about what it does. You can target specific factions, boost happiness in specific demographics, run loyalty campaigns. You can make people feel better about their situation without actually changing anything about it. There's a concept called manufactured consent. The idea that in a functioning propaganda system, you don't need to force people to comply. You just shape what they think is normal and what they believe they want, what they think is true. The radio station in Tropico is a cartoon version of that, but it's not wrong. The uncomfortable thing about this mechanic isn't that it exists in a game about a silly dictator on a tropical island, it's that it works by the same logic as real governance. You don't need gulags if you have a good enough media. Edicts are basically executive orders. One person, no vote, immediate effect. And Tropico presents the benign ones and the authoritarian ones in the exact same cheerful font and beautiful UI. That tonal flatness is one of the most interesting design choices in the game. It doesn't editorialize, it just shows you the trade-offs and lets you decide. Here's where it gets a little direct. This is the election option menu, and it has everything on it from just legitimate campaigning, even a little voter bribery. You can also, on the back end, arrest your opposition candidate. You can do a little ballot stuffing, and you can just cancel the election altogether. Here's one I want to point out here, is that the game puts democratic tools and authoritarian tools in the exact same place. And the only thing determining which ones you reach for is how much pressure you're under and how much you care about the distinction in your democracy. In a real soft authoritarian system, those things exist on the same spectrum too. Most leaders don't start by rigging elections. They start by shaping the information environment, which shifts approval, which means they need to rig less. It's gradual. Tropico shows you the end state of that process and lets you work backwards to understand how anyone gets there. So here's the feedback loop. Approval goes up when you target the right people with the right messaging. When approval is high, you don't need the dirty tools. When it's low, the dirty tools are right there. That's the whole game. And it's also a decent model of how democratic backsliding actually works. It's not a sudden coup, just a slow drift towards whatever is easiest. Alright, real run now. Colonial era, the starting point of Tropico's timeline. Basing nothing to work with, small island, a colonial power watching over you, limited budget. The early game is mostly resource management, not very political yet, but that changes pretty quickly. This is the moment the game stops being a city builder. Someone wants something, and whatever you build to satisfy them is going to annoy someone else. Political scientists call this a distributional conflict. Resources are finite. Who gets them and in what order is a political decision. In Tropico, it's low stakes and kind of funny. In a real government, it's the real thing that determines elections, causes protests, and occasionally starts revolutions. All right, first real political pressure. I decided to help out the revolutionaries, and the result was I angered the royalists, the royal crown who is in charge of my colony. Even trying to do it the right way, I still had to make a call that someone hated. That's not a failure of the game, that's the game working correctly. One of the things Suzerain, which we're getting to next episode, does explicitly is name this. Political decisions under resource constraints are almost always zero sum somewhere. The question isn't whether you make enemies, it's which enemies you can afford to make. I want to zoom out for a second. What Tropico is modeling, mostly without saying so, is the day-to-day work of staying in power at the micro level. Not ideology, not vision, just the constant management of who's happy enough not to be a problem. Real scholarship on how authoritarian leaders actually persist in power points to exactly this. It's not usually brute force, it's patronage, targeted benefits, information control, and just enough legitimacy to keep most people from deciding that revolt is worth the risk. Tropico gamifies that and makes it fun, but the underlying logic is real. Here's what Tropico 6 teaches without ever calling itself a civics game. Propaganda and elections are not opposites. They're the same dial. Democratic tools and authoritarian tools exist in the same menu, and which one you reach for depends on how much pressure you're under and how much you care about the distinction. Faction management is governance. Distributional conflict is real. And the gap between legitimate leadership and staying in power by any means is a lot smaller and a lot more gradual than most of us want to believe. Next episode, we're going somewhere heavier. Suzerain puts you in office after the dictatorship is already over and asks you what it actually takes to rebuild democracy when the people around you aren't sure they want it.